The Late Lunch with Blackstone Motors Drogheda.
But I went on to have a second daughter 18 months later in St. Patrick's on the Navan Road. And we spoke there about the ages of the people in Dunboyne. It was the very same in St. Patrick's on the Navan Road. And I encountered a woman who would be similar to Grace, who we're hearing about lately. And, you know, I have the height of empathy with Grace and her mother. But I encountered a woman who was 37. Her name was Angela, and that's not the name given to her at the time. I'm using a different name to protect her, and whoever else is still living out there belonged to her. And she was 37, but she had the mentality, or, you know, she had the mental capacity of a 7-year-old. She was on her 4th pregnancy. Nobody asked in the convent, how did this happen? That girl or woman was transferred from St. Patrick's on the Navan Road to St. James's Hospital prior to her going into labour, because she wouldn't know what labour was. And there were other girls who were in St. James's from St. Pat's for other medical reasons during their pregnancies. And word came back, because there was, there was camaraderie and there was connection between us mothers. And word came back that Angela had a visit from her elderly mother on a Sunday, and Angela went to go to the bathroom, and she gave birth to her baby on the toilet. Angela was returned to St. Pat's without an infant. We don't know whether that infant survived. And I'll tell you a little bit about Angela. She used to stand with us in the night time after the nuns were gone to bed, and we'd go out to the toilet to have a cigarette. We weren't supposed to do it, but at least we were breaking the rules somewhere. And Angela would come out and join us some of those nights. And she would tell us about the prizes that she won for acting as the Plum Fairy in school plays. And she would perform the Plum Fairy ballet dancing for us. This is a 37-year-old woman with the mental capacity of a 7-year-old, pregnant on her 4th pregnancy. Now, I met Minister Flanagan in 2014, before the terms of reference of the Commission of Inquiry were established. And it was, this was an issue I raised with him. I said, what about the women that were there and the girls, the young girls that were there, possibly victims of rape? A woman with reduced mental capacity, and her on her 4th pregnancy, and her only having the mentality of a 7-year-old. Did any of those nuns ask why? How come? Was there ever any criminal investigations in relation to how these young girls and that woman? And I'm not the only one that witnessed this. There are 65 mothers in the group, in Irish First Mothers. And almost every one of us have stories to tell that is similar to that and similar to poor Grace's story. And do you know what Mr. O'Flanagan said? Mr. O'Flanagan told me there are Garda stations open in almost every town and city in Ireland. Some of them are open 24 hours a day. If there were crimes committed, they should be reported there. That's why I cry. Because of those women. Because of the mothers that came back to Dunboyne after their babies been taken from them in Holles St Hospital. And the tears and the sadness and the numbness because we were put into shock. I think of the women in St. Patrick's who were on the, when they were delivered to St. Patrick's, and you'd hear the sobbing late at night of those women and those young girls, and we'd go around to see could we find who was crying so we could comfort them. I think of the mothers the young mothers, whether they were engaged to be married or not, whether the fathers of their child, wanted to take responsibility and still cared for his girlfriend. Those mothers had their babies ripped from their arms. And that's what brings me such grief. And now I realise that, I was there in 1975, and I'm shocked. I'm absolutely shocked to the core that up to the 90s, this was still being done. We're not talking about ancient history here. We're talking about young women today, still walking around in their 40s, who are suffering the same trauma, the same shame, and their voices are not being heard. I'm sorry, Deirdre.
Don't apologise. Don't apologise. And among the women, you were 18, as I said. Was it a broad spectrum of ages, or was it mostly younger women? What do you recall of the women that you interacted with?
They were a broad spectrum of ages, and also they would have hailed from all over the country. It wasn't just on the southeast side. So it was, basically they spanned the country and they spanned ages. But in particular, and I have vivid memories of a 12-year-old who was in Dunboyne during the time that I was there. And that brings huge grief for me, just, remembering that there were girls and children that young that were present at the time that I was there. And, I'm 61 now, and that's never left me, the fact that there were such young women there.
And that 12-year-old Kathy was expecting a baby?
Yeah, she was pregnant. She was small in stature, beautiful long hair, and very childlike. She should have been still playing with her dolls. Very chatty and so on, possibly oblivious to what was actually happening to her. I mean, we're talking about 1974, and we know in general that 12-year-olds were still very much children then. 12-year-olds now are a little bit more advanced. We've got internet access and there's a lot more information. The education system is slightly different. So, and this girl was from a rural family, so I'd imagine that her innocence was...
It was hush-hush going in there, Kathy, and I don't know if you can remember, I mean, among your family, obviously at the time, the stigma attached to unmarried or single mothers.
That was horrific. Yeah, sorry, Deirdre, I keep cutting across you.
That's fine. Take your time. It's not an easy job to come on air and tell your story, but I get the sense from you that you've been a long time waiting for this moment.
Well, I've been speaking out for the last 4 years in particular, and prior to that, I had spoken to friends, people that had got to know me, and I was telling them about my experience. But over the last 4 years, I started to speak out, and I'm here where I am today, trying to encourage other mothers, because there's a huge sense of shame that's attached because of, the attitude towards, and I think there's still an attitude today towards women who became pregnant outside of marriage and who spent time in mother and baby homes.
Bring me back, Kathy, if you will, because I do want people to understand what happened to you then subsequently after you went into labour and were taken to Holles St from Dunboyne. Tell me a little bit about the memories of that and of the birth of your first daughter.
Well, I remember actually the morning that it was actually a week before I actually went into labour, and there were signs that it was imminent. And I spoke to one of the nuns, I think her name was Sister Anne, I'm not 100% sure, and she examined me, and I'd had what they call a show. So on Friday the 26th, my labour began, and I was brought into Holles St Hospital through the Phoenix Park in minivan or mini bus that Sister Anne used to drive, and I was dropped at the door of Holles St, and I had to go in and speak to reception, and then a nurse came and brought me to the maternity, the delivery suite. My delivery went on until 10:30 at night. My labour went on until 10:30 at night. I was highly drugged. I was left on my own throughout the initial stages of labour. And that was very frightening because it was my first experience of childbirth. And there were other women in cubicles around me who were going through the height of labour. So I knew where babies came from, but I was quite squeamish. So I was highly drugged. I don't remember. I have vague memories of the delivery of my daughter. And I've no memory of the first hour or two afterwards. I woke up in what was like another cubicle, darkened, and I must have been crying out because a nurse came in, and I asked her, how was my baby? Was my baby okay? And she said she was fine, I was just stressed. So I seen my baby for the first time the next morning, and I was moved into a general ward with other post-delivery mothers, and we were told that we weren't to talk about our marital status. And if anybody, if there was other girls there from Dunboyne or any other of the institutions, that we weren't to be heard to be talking about our situation where other people could hear us. And on the 6th or 7th day, I was being discharged. And I've heard one other mother mention before when she was asked about her time in hospital, and she said she would have just stayed there forever if it meant she could be with her baby. And that really, hit home for me because I think most of us would. But I was being discharged, so I had knitted baby clothes for my baby while I was in Dunboyne, and I dressed her up in the clothes that I had brought for her and knitted for her. And as I turned to dress myself, I turned to the bed to get my clothes, and I turned back. There was a nurse walking out of the ward with my baby. And I asked where was she going. There was a relative of mine there with me to pick me up to bring me home, and I asked where was she going with my baby, and I was told she's gone. So that was the last time that I've seen my baby for 28 years.
And Kathy, prior to that moment, you didn't realise what was going to happen?
Well, there was never any specific talk among family or even, in Dunboyne with the nuns and so on. But there was one incident where I kept in contact with my baby's father, and after I had been delivered to Dunboyne, we'd no home phone, and I hadn't had a chance to contact him. So down in Dunboyne, I rang him, and a few days later, I was called to the visitors' parlour in the convent section, and there was a priest there. He didn't say who he was, or I don't remember if he said, but he told me that I'd basically I'd led my child's father astray, that I'd encouraged him to do, what had been done, and I was trying to ruin his life, that he had prospects, and that my baby was going for adoption whether I liked it or not, and I was never to have contact with the father of my child again.
How did you react to that, Kathy? Can you remember?
I don't remember. I think that memory only came back years later, because then, after my baby was born, I was returned to the family home, and the relative who was sent to pick me up, it wasn't either of my parents, but that relative was under the same forced secrecy as I was. And, there was instructions that when I got home, because I had younger siblings, I was to act like nothing happened. So I had to go home and pretend nothing had happened, walk properly, even though I had quite a few stitches and so on.
That's hard to even comprehend, even something like that, because I imagine even the psychological trauma of what's happened, let alone what's physically happened to a woman's body after giving birth. How did you manage to do that, Cathy?
I don't remember. I just did it. I just did it. The good girl, not upsetting anybody. It wasn't about us mothers. It was about everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I find today that we're still expected to be like that. Like, oh, well, why are you doing that? Why are you talking about that? What about us and what about our feelings? Well, I'm not looking for fighting fire with fire, as such as somebody mentioned recently. But it's our story, and we're entitled to talk about it and tell our story, and we're entitled to justice.
The Late Lunch with Blackstone Motors Drogheda.
Cathy McMahon joins us. She is an advocate now, the Irish First Mothers Group, and she's been telling us her story about her time at the Good Shepard Home in Dunboyne. But Cathy, bring us to your second pregnancy and your time on the Navan Road, because you learned something from your first experience that kind of informed what happened to you the second time around.
Yeah, well, I learned to be a bit more silent and not to get sucked into the psychological aspects of the homes, where, the whole secrecy and hush-hush and being, made to feel like, you were a sinner or that you'd done something terribly wrong. So I went through 4 months in St. Patrick's with my second child, and I interacted with girls. I did whatever chores we were expected to do. I asked my mother not to visit me there because I would have done anything that my parents asked, basically. And I just needed to centre on my needs and the needs of my child. But my mother had a social worker who was an employee of the health board come visit me every week. And his task was basically to do the job that my mother couldn't do because, and I'm not saying this out of vindictiveness towards my mother. I love my mother. And I understand the dynamics that were going around at the time. I don't necessarily agree that was all the Catholic Church or so on, but this social worker was sent to visit me every week, and it was to just, keep me in line. And I didn't talk about adoption. I didn't talk about keeping my baby. I just went through the pregnancy. I actually was attending a psychiatrist while I was there from the health board. He used to come out, and if you're feeling a bit depressed or whatever, he'd give you a prescription, or, there'd be a prescription written for Valium, which I think is very interesting now, considering all that I know about medications and so on. I don't necessarily attribute my resilience to the medications I was taking, but it just gave me eye-openers into things. Anyway, I gave birth to my baby. The babies were born on the grounds of St. Patrick's on the Navan Road in what was known as the Rocks. It was a small single-storey building with 2 wards and a delivery section in it. And I still didn't say what I was doing. And a social worker came to visit me shortly after, within days of my baby being born. And that was the first time I actually said, I haven't made a decision yet. And I'll let you know when I'm ready to let you know. And when I was then, my daughter and I were transferred back to the nursery in the main building, the social worker from the health board came to visit, and I dropped it on him. I'd been working, I had redundancy money. My plans actually, prior to my mother being told that I was pregnant the second time, I was planning on going to England because I had some money. And the social worker tried to convince me that was coming to visit me. He had been trying to convince me, as I said, sorry, I'm going to be repeating myself, to do my mother's bidding. So on about a week after my daughter was born, he came to visit, and I just said, I'm not giving my baby for adoption, I'm keeping her. And then the following week he came, and they came up with the idea that I should take a break for a week and go to my brother in England and leave the baby with the nuns. And I'm glad that I never did that. I told him that whatever money I had, I needed it to start life with my baby, because I had no home to go to. And I did inquire with the nuns, and at that time I was told that anybody that was looking, because there were girls there was one girl who I remember had twin boys, and she was from the north of the country, in the south, if you understand, and she wanted to go home to tell her father about her twin boys, because she wanted to bring them home, but she was never allowed back. So the nun said, well, anybody who's looking to go tell their families or looking to take a break, they have to sign a document before they leave. And if they're not back on the day that they say they'll be back, the baby will go for adoption. So I refused to go and leave my baby on her own. I ended up staying in St. Patrick's on the Navan Road. My daughter was born in mid-October, and I stayed in St. Patrick's until early December, because the amount of money that I spent on phone calls trying to find a place to live with my daughter was unbelievable. No landlord wanted a single mother in their premises. Eventually there was another girl, and I'm still trying to find her, who arrived in St. Patrick's after her baby was born. He was a mixed race baby, and her and I teamed up together, and we found a place together, and we moved out with our babies. Now, in the meantime, between finding a place and moving out, we were being harassed, we were being bullied. We were called to the Reverend Mother's office late one night and told that we should give our babies up for adoption, and we could do whatever the hell we liked for Christmas. Our babies would be happy.
But you refused that, Kathy?
I refused it, and the other girl refused it as well.
Mm-hmm.
The Late Lunch with Blackstone Motors Drogheda.
We're talking to Kathy McMahon, who has set up a group called Irish First Mothers Group, a bit to hear those stories of the women who spent time in the mother and baby homes around the country. And Kathy herself spent some time in Good Shepard in Dunboyne and also St. Patrick's on the Navan Road. Kathy, when we last spoke, we were talking about your second pregnancy and how you stood up to the institutions, the systems, the second time around, and didn't let your daughter out of your sight. Talk to me a little bit about, because you did at a later stage in your life, and you went on to get married and have more children, but you had that quest throughout your life to find your first daughter.
Yes, that's right. I made contact with Bernardo's in the late 80s, asking about my daughter, and I found out she was still alive. They couldn't give me an awful lot of information, or they wouldn't give me an awful lot of information. And then I ended up with medical problems, so I was in and out of hospital. And just about around the time that I was gathering my strength again to begin the search, myself and my two sons were involved in a road traffic accident, and my third child, I'm losing track of the amount I had now, my third child, Justin, died in a road traffic accident.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And myself and my younger son were seriously injured.
Mm-hmm. So that threw you back a bit, Kathy, I'm very sorry to to hear that. That threw you back in your search. You were, I suppose, at that time physically and mentally not able to do it. What drove you on then in the end? Because you did carry on with your search. You were successful in meeting her.
Yeah, that's right. In 1999, a lot of things came to a head, and I ended up doing voluntary work. I've always done voluntary work throughout my adult life, within my communities where I lived. And I met a guy who was setting up suicide prevention, which was called Men's Aid, and I offered to help out on that. So through that person that I met, Fintan Dunn is his name, we're still good friends, and he's actually been very helpful to our group, Irish First Mothers. Through Fintan, I met a friend of his who was an adopted person himself, and he informed me about an online database being run by the Adopted Persons Association, and I went on that in 99 and I filled in my details. And every couple of days I'd check. The idea of the database was that if I and my daughter registered, that we would be successful in finding a match. And so every other day I was checking to see was there a match, and I was unsuccessful. And then I realised that I'd actually put in the 24th of April instead of the 26th of April. And so I corrected that, and the guy from the association was actually visiting me that evening when I put in the correct date, and I checked, and up popped a match. So he went back to his office and checked the details, and then he wrote to my daughter and told her, found out information from her to ensure that we had the correct person. And then all of my information was sent to her, and it was left to her when she would contact me. And I received an email about 2 months later from her, and we remained in email contact for 3 years, and we eventually met for the first time in 2003.
Well, I'm so happy for you that you had that moment, that you had the chance to meet your daughter. Can you describe what that felt like, or can you put it to words?
I can't. Surreal. Very emotional. In the 3 years prior to us actually meeting, I'd get all worked up. Oh my God, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be too common? Am I going to be, am I going to look all right? But when the day came, everything was fine, and we met away from, either of our homes. We met somewhere, we met actually in the hotel up on the Newlands Cross. Mm-hmm. And we spent a few hours together, her husband-to-be and a friend of mine, and then we didn't meet again for several years. And the last time we met was about the second time we met was 4 years ago, when my youngest son came to meet her with me, and we also got to meet her 2 children. And then just after Christmas this year, for the first time ever, I had all of my children and my grandchildren under the same roof. And that was very emotional for me. And it was amazing to stand back and see my 2 daughters embracing for the first time. They had been in contact on Facebook and so on, but it was the first time to meet, because my second daughter went on in her adult life to work and live abroad. She worked for the UN for 13 years. So she's back in Ireland now and has had her first baby, and not living too far from my first daughter.
Okay, so the grandmother experience has been a positive one for you too.
Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant. It's amazing. But I'd just like to speak, if I could,
sure,
in relation to our group And
I suppose really the point that we need to get to on this, Cathy, and it's really pertinent that you tell us your story, but we have to get to the point because there are serious objectives that you are looking for as part of Irish First Mothers, changes that you feel could and need to happen here to improve the lives of those that gave up their children and those that were adopted.
Exactly, that's right. Well, first of all, just a brief about our group. Our group started up on Facebook in 2014 as a peer-to-peer support group, and then the revelations about Tuam broke in the media, and we found ourselves thrown into what we're doing now. Our group consists at the moment of 65 plus people. We are based on Facebook, but also we have phone calls from people around the country who haven't got the internet. And we meet up from time to time. We also have had yearly conferences for the last 3 years. And last year, for the first time for an awful lot of women, we actually returned to Dunboyne. And the Dunboyne Castle Hotel were absolutely brilliant, very welcoming of us. And they provided the facilities for us to have our conference, and gave us the opportunity to explore the old part of the convent, and anything we wanted, we had. So I have to say that the Dunboyne Castle, and it was a very healing experience for the mothers who attended. We're hoping to have another conference again this year. Everything has been so busy, we haven't had time to actually, get down to that quite yet, but we will be making announcements. The group, we have engaged with the Commission of Inquiry, and I have mentioned that we did meet with Minister Flanagan and Riley prior to the terms of reference being launched. When the terms of reference were launched, Irish First Mothers were the only group who actually didn't welcome the terms of reference because the scope was too narrow. And, the Adoption Rights Alliance have stated that because of the narrowness of the terms of reference, 2/3 of women who experienced concealed pregnancy and forced adoption have been obliterated from this inquiry. That's a massive amount of people. We call that there should have been an investigation into processes rather than individual homes. But we just went with what we were given, still keeping an eye on things. And I have to say that today I am very disappointed with the Commission of Inquiry, because us mothers have had to struggle in order to get responses in relation to our applications. We have found it very difficult to decipher and to get information in relation to how do you give your testimony in public. The fact that there are two committees, an investigation committee and a confidential committee. The confidential committee is the one that's been pushed. When you apply for an application form, you receive in the post a form to apply for the confidential committee.
But you want this out in the open, Cathy?
I think anybody that's out there who feels that they are prepared, that they're able and capable of giving their testimony, their evidence in public, it should be facilitated. Because for far too long, we've been kept silent. We're not behind the convent doors anymore, but my personal experience of trying to engage with the Commission is that it's all the same secrecy. It's the hushed voices. It's the why do you want to give that evidence in public because, what about other people? And I'm not saying that we should be out there with violence or anything, but it's our story. We are the ones who lived the experience. We were from the age of 12 and younger, I've heard, who were incarcerated in the convents. I'm so bold as to call them concentration camps. And Irish First Mothers have made a request to the Attorney General for their advice in relation to looking at all of this issue on the basis of genocide. Because when you look at it And genocide doesn't just entail mass murders. It entails the psychological damage. It entails the removal of infants and given to infants of others, or given to other families. So, we've asked for that, and we would like a response from the Attorney General in relation to our request for advice.
Okay. Cathy, we are going to have to leave it at that today. We've run over far more than we had intended, but I really appreciate your openness and you telling us your story, because your story is the story of hundreds of other women.
Well, I mean, and I'm not going to keep you long, but this is one of the things that our group has discovered. One mother tells her story, and it's all of our stories. I'm not speaking, I've told my story today in order to let people know that, that's what I went through, but it's what thousands of other women went through. It's not about me, it's about all of us. And I encourage women out there to, if they're on Facebook, join Voice of First Mothers or email firstmotherstogether@gmail.com, and they get directly through to me and I can add them to the group. We're based on confidentiality and respect for each other. We do have the public face, which is the Voice of First Mothers, and there is irishfirstmothers.com. But I'm calling on transparency, openness, and away with the secretiveness. We're not gagged anymore. We did nothing wrong. We were not sinners or fallen women. We're human, and we deserve our voices to be heard.
Well said. Cathy McMahon, thank you very much for joining us on Late Lunch this afternoon.